Welcome, traveler. Settle into the hush of night as Westeros unrolls like a map by candlelight. If gentle epics help you drift, please tap subscribe and stay with us. Breathe slower, let armor fade to whispers, and follow soft footsteps through ancient halls toward theories warm as hearthfire tonight. Gently. First, a promise the stars once made to the sea. Watch the parchment breathe beneath your fingers, the black ink glistening as if each sigil were a small, living thing that stirs when the wind touches the shutters. Hear the rain's far-off tapping, like a council of old maesters nodding in agreement that even known histories are a quilt of memory and rumor. The lion seems to blink. The stag seems to lift its proud head. The direwolf lowers its muzzle, as if scenting snow. The kraken curls a tentacle around a corner where the paper has curled with age, and the dragon arches, scaled spine shining in the candle's flutter. You could imagine the room is empty save for you, a pool of lamplight, and the soft rasp of breath, as if the map itself has lungs and remembers the frost of winter and the musk of summer storms. Tonight, we walk the border between what is told and what could be, through warm, calm corridors, where theories become lullabies, and each answer arrives like a tide, not to startle, but to smooth. The old songs still hum through the stones. There was a prince, perhaps promised, perhaps shaped by the telling, who would rise when the dark pressed too near the door. Azor Ahai, say the red candles, as their crimson tears harden around the brass. The words fall like embers, salt and smoke, a bleeding star, a blade tempered in something more than steel. Some nights the tide speaks that name as foam hisses up the black rocks. Some nights the gulls refuse it. If prophecy is a road, it is paved in candles guttering in the wind, and men and women bring their own lanterns, each flame with its own color and hunger. Look how the world has tried the name on different shoulders. A bastard who rose with a quieter gravity than thunder. A mother of dragons with ash in her hair and fire stitched into her bones. A smith who forged a kingdom out of iron and stubbornness. A hidden prince whose life was spent in whispers. A queen with a prayer that sounded like a command. Each candidate bears the weight of salt. Tears that tasted of goodbyes. Seas that carried armies. Sweat under the sun on a day when choice burned hotter than steel. And smoke. Pyres for the old ways. Hearthfires around which strange alliances warmed their hands. Breath steaming in the night when vows were spoken to no one in particular. Only to the darkness that always listens. The bleeding star, was it a comet tearing the sky with a wound the heavens could not stitch for many seasons? Or was it a sign seen in the eyes of the desperate, or in the sudden crimson of a battlefield, where dawn struck sword edges and made them look aflame? The story learned from the people who held it. It changed shape like molten iron worked by many hammers. Perhaps the prince is not one face, but a moment that needs whoever is brave enough to step into it. The light does not belong to the hand that lifts it, but to the night that asks for it. In the hush, you can almost hear steel sigh, as if every blade remembers the time before it was named. The ocean sighs back at black stone. Somewhere in the corners of memory, a red woman sees fires arrange themselves into a truth she can almost hold. And when she reaches, they slide like water through her fingers, leaving warmth and ash, and the certainty that even wrong readings can shape the path to right ends. There are nights when the prince is just a child who relights a camp's dying coals. There are nights when the prince is a mother who chooses mercy even when mercy hurts. There are nights when the prince is no one, and that emptiness is the blade that cuts the knot. But what if the sky's omen was just a mirror. A red wound once crossed the firmament, as if a god had drawn a blade across the blue and let the world look for its own face in the spilling light. Men pointed, women whispered, children learned to look up. In the camps of would-be kings, the comet wore many masks. To a queen far from her birth, it gleamed like a dragon's eye opening at last, an ember left from an empire that refused to fully die. She felt it in her teeth like the taste of iron, and in her lungs like the first deep breath after smoke. To a king who preferred green to red, it was a banner of his own making. For men will tell you the sky speaks their language when they need to believe they are named. To the starving, it was a long red fruit no hand could reach. To the crows, a bloodline of evening. To the learned, it was the ordinary spun into myth by fear and desire. Fate and projection danced together as they always do. And if you slid your fingertip along the night, you would feel how easily the heart joins stars into constellations shaped like itself. Perhaps the comet guided. Perhaps it reflected. Perhaps it simply burned, uncaring and brilliant, while mortals unfurled sails under omens that most comforted them. But look closer. Even if the sky does not speak, it teaches. Even if it offers no direction, it reminds you to look into darkness long enough to map your own compass. And maybe that is all an omen is, a reason to be brave in a season when bravery has to be borrowed from something brighter than you. See how the streak settles into dawn fog in your mind, red meeting gray, heat meeting hush, and the world choosing at every moment whether to be led by fear or by a quieter, slower kind of faith. Where prophecies speak, so do old curses. In a tower of polished stone and perfumed tapestries, and the careful music of crystal laid gently on wood, a queen once listened to a prophecy with her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles went pale. The words curved around her neck like a collar she would not remove. You will be queen for a time, and then a younger, more beautiful will come to cast you down. Your children will wear crowns of gold, and their shrouds will be gold. And when your tears have salted the earth, the Valonqar, little brother, shall wrap his hands about your pale white throat and choke the life from you. From that hour, she dreamed strangling hands at the edges of every feast and every victory. She counted brothers the way sailors count storms. Some nights the hands were gentle, almost loving. Others they were brutish, as if the prophecy wanted her to fear every gesture. This is how prophecy snares the mighty. It turns every kindness into a blade, every shadow into a rumor with teeth. She had 2 brothers to measure, the twin whose face was her own in a funhouse mirror, and the dwarf whose wit cut deeper than most swords. Little brother, it could be either. It could be both. It could be neither. For in a life of crown and chamber, little brothers appear in 100 guises. The little brother of a house, of a city, of an age, of the stories themselves. The smallest hands can tip a throne, and fear, when fed, is a gardener that grows the fruits it dreads. If you walk by moonlight, you may see the silver ring on a goblet and the wine trembling in answer. Perhaps she strangled herself by degrees, each cruel choice tightening the scarf of fate. Perhaps love, twisted and hidden from light, reached for her one final time, and mercy, denied 1,000 days, decided to wear the shape of a small, inevitable violence. The truth waits like a patient cat atop the bookshelves, tail flicking, eyes reflecting candlelight. It knows that a prophecy is not a command, but a mirror. It knows that those who live under omens build the stairways the omens require. Somewhere hands hover above a throat, unsure whether they are saving or ending, and the answer slides away like satin. All the while, the goblet's ring widens, ripples reaching the rim, then returning, soft as the breath of someone asleep beside you. In the forest of ancient roots, where the oaks talk to the alders and the heart trees keep red secrets in white bark, there is an old woman whose dreams taste of iron and rain. The ghost of High Heart hums to herself beneath a hill that has listened to wars for 1,000 years, and the wind bends close to hear her riddles. She remembers kings before they were born and funerals before the bodies are cold. Sometimes the dreams are fair. A girl in grey with a wolf for a shadow. A broken sword raised one last time in a place where the sea refuses to be blue. A feast where the food tastes of the lies that seasoned it. Sometimes the dreams are kind. More often they are only honest. The Targaryens across the centuries knew another flavor of dream. Dragons coil through sleep and leave ash on the pillows. A man in summer saw a winter vision. A woman in spring smelled autumn smoke. And in their waking they kept their eyes half closed, as if refusing to let clarity steal the last spark from a vision that really mattered because it was felt more than understood. Green dreams have another music. Down in the crannogs where the reeds sing and the frogs are choir masters, a boy closes his eyes and sees through leaves, through crow's wings, through the slowed heartbeat of the marsh itself. Dreams are tides that carry us where the waking road cannot. They pull in the moon's rhythm, and there are nights when the whole realm turns gently on the spindle of a single sleeping child. Wind passes through the heart trees, and the leaves whisper names, and the names are not always of the living. The old woman touches the earth as if it were fevered and listens. If dreams remember us, what do they want? Perhaps only that we remember them back, that we let the soft fur of the unseen creature brush our ankle in the dark and do not kick, that we let blind things lead us safely across waters we cannot map. When you sleep tonight, the trees will watch without judgment, and your breath will sound like distant oars. Snow comes between heartbeats when you least expect it, filling the world with a quiet that carries farther than any shout. In the hush, hoofprints become hollows of shadow, and a lone torch sighs as if it were tired of its own heat. The night loves you when you are small. Follow the bloodlines through the hush. Under a sky too large for comfort, in a room too small for a promise, a young man held out his hands and felt the thorns of people's hopes catch on his cuffs. R+L = J is an equation that looks simple until you ask the numbers for their names. Blue roses smelled like winter-remembered summers, their petals shivering even when the room was warm. In a lonely tower wrapped in the sound of wind around stone, the Kingsguard stood like statues whose veins ran with vow instead of blood. A promise was made, and promises are anchors dropped into seas no chart can fathom. A woman's breath grew shallow. A man's voice shook. A child arrived like a secret written before the ink was dry on a war. The mathematics of the heart balanced a ledger that politics had cooked. Love is the most treasonous arithmetic. Sworn swords weighed 2 oaths on a scale that broke in the middle. Oath to crown, oath to honor, oath to something newer than both, a life not meant to be discarded to the wolves. It is easier to guard a door than a truth. It is easier to smuggle a name than a kingdom. So a boy was wrapped in silence and sent into a world that would call him bastard and let him learn humility like a second language. He learned also how cold can be a tutor and how duty can be a mother when mothers must vanish. On long nights, his breath made ghosts in the air, and he spoke to them without knowing he spoke to a memory that wore a different face. The tower keeps its whisper, the petals dry in a book no one opens. The equation waits under the bed like a monster a child makes peace with. When the day comes to balance it aloud, the room will feel suddenly bigger and the sky smaller, as if the world itself had finally remembered an old debt and felt both lighter and more bound. A rose is never only a rose. It is a map to a song that was sung softly enough to survive. Far away from home, beneath chandeliers shaped like cages, and on decks where salt bites the tongue with a mother's stubbornness, the phrase 3 heads of the dragon turns slowly in the mind, like a coin that shows a different ruler each time you flip it. Once upon a time there were 3. 1 to master fear, 1 to master fire, 1 to master themselves. Or perhaps 1 to love, 1 to rage, 1 to weep. And the dragon flies only when all 3 winds lift it. A girl born amid storms grew into her name so carefully that sometimes even her enemies used it with a kind of awe, as if she had borrowed it from an older book and returned it improved. She had 2 brothers, 1 dead and 1 who might as well have been, and neither fit the saddles the age required. She found new brothers in strangers and new sisters in women who refused to be small. Who then are the 3? Some say the North sent one, a quiet lord with watchfire in his bones. Some say the West sent one, small in stature but huge in the cunning that builds bridges where men only saw cliffs. Some say a boy painted as a prince will paint himself truer by deeds than by blood. Some say the 3rd head will be no man at all, but a song made flesh in the moment when the people stop kneeling and stand together. And what of the dwarf with eyes like quicksilver who learned to drink truth from sour cups? Rumors cling to him the way sea-wet clothes cling to a body, that his mother's laughter offended a king, that a whim turned into a knight, that bloodline can be forged sharper than steel, but is just as brittle. Rumors make myths, myths make riders, riders fall. If you lift a scale to the light, it throws stars on the wall, little constellations that shift when the candle sighs. Some bloodlines are written in ash, and ash is fertile. What matters is not the father's name but the child's mercy, not the house but the hearth in the child's chest. The dragons bow to strength, yes, but only to the kind of strength that knows when to lower the blade and raise the hand. On a night like this, the 3 heads might simply be 3 choices: to forgive, to free, to find the courage to sleep without the lamp. And if you count, you will notice the old magic in the number, the way stories prefer trios, the way a stool stands firm, the way the sky finds balance with 3 bright guardians to guide sailors home. Elsewhere, a ship moves like a slow thought through a narrow sea, and a boy studies under lamps that smell of foreign oil. His hair is brushed the way a nurse would brush a prince's hair. His posture is corrected the way a tutor would correct a king's. He answers to Aegon with the practiced ease of someone who has had his name rehearsed for him since the first stories were told into his cradle. But truth is not a costume that fits just because it has been measured. Varys and Illyrio weave with quick hands. They prefer the soft looms of rumor and debt and the threads that pity spins. They tell themselves at night that they are saving a realm from the hungers of harder men. They fall asleep on pillows that keep the shape of old choices. Blackfire echoes move like fish just under the skin of the water. Flickers you can miss if you blink, glints you can chase until you forget how far from shore you are. The boy learns to smile modestly, and to speak boldly, and to hold a sword as if it were a quill, and a quill as if it were a sword. He believes because belief has been fed to him from a crystal spoon. But a painted dragon becomes less paint and more dragon with each kindness done without reward, with each night spent cold because the people were colder. A usurper becomes a savior if the people sleep better. And if the truth unveiled one day proves him a prince of ink, not blood, the ink can still write laws that do not break the poor. Ships whisper in their rigging when the wind finds the right nerve, and in those whispers you can hear an older lesson. Legitimacy grows from the ground up, root by root, vow by vow, until a boy's manners turn into a man's mercy, and a man's mercy turns into a realm's new morning. Masks fit best in the dark, but dawn cares less for faces than for deeds. The lantern sways. Coins click softly in a hidden purse. Somewhere a plan removes another layer of itself and wonders what shape it will be when the last veil drops. At the edge of day, where the first star trembles over a river that keeps her secrets even in drought, a woman stands with her hands folded, and a name people say with the care reserved for swords and saints. Ashara Dane is a story told as if the telling itself might wake her, and in the telling she becomes everyone's first sorrow and first wonder. Did she fall, or was she pushed, or did she choose the sky the way some choose the sea? The water eats answers little by little, until all that remains are ripples that look like words if you're tired enough. A pale blade named for the morning rests somewhere like a long-held breath. Dawn does not draw itself from iron. It drinks the cold of a fallen star and returns that chill as clarity. Each rumor is a stitch, Lemore the scepter who seems to know too much about the wrong things, the midwife who sees in the dark and knows when a child must leave one name for another, the mother whose absence is a presence that turns pages on windy nights. Starlight pools on steel when the room remembers how to be quiet. It is easier to worship the tragic than to serve the living, and this is why the tales of Ashara keep their perfume. We want beauty to explain the pain that doesn't. But look, mothers who are not remembered raise kings who are. Midwives who are not sung bring saviors to the door of history. Women who do not wear crowns hold the heads of those who will and teach them humility before the metal kisses their brows. When a star falls, who names it? Whoever is awake to catch its light without claiming it. Whoever knows that a blade can be the memory of a kindness as much as an instrument of justice. In that hush, a river turns the same corner it has turned forever, and no one asks where the water has gone, because the answer is everywhere. Oars dip in velvet water. A city's black stones swallow moonlight and return it as a smooth, almost oily gleam. The tide under black water thinks in a language too old for men, and yet tonight it hums a translation you can feel in your bones. The schemes of the south and the vows of the north both drink from me, and I am patient. Northward, where old pacts breathe. Northward, where old pacts breathe, the air thins into a clarity that feels older than speech, and the snow speaks first, saying, hush to hoof and boot, hush to iron and oath, hush to every hot word that thought it mattered below the neck. In that hush, the night arranges its furniture, a line of trees like listeners, a drift like a folded blanket, a field of frost that remembers the shape of 1,000 hoofprints and refuses to be impressed. Here the world explains winter without malice. Here breath rises like pale banners and is accepted by the dark as tribute, and the dark returns only the faintest glitter that rides every flake as it falls, as if the sky is making soft corrections to a story no one finished telling. They say that others hate, but hatred is a small, bright thing, and these are wide and slow, and exact. They move like rules, not like men. Their steps are an arithmetic we are only learning to count. When dawn finds a spiral traced in shattered bone and blue-white ice chips, it is easy to call it cruel and stop there. To say monster and lock the door. To turn in the saddle and convince yourself that a pattern is only a warning you can outrun if you spur hard enough. But what if those spirals are minutes cut into hours, the old calendar by which a colder world kept its order? What if every array of limbs is a ledger entry in a language that refuses ink? Even a forest must prune. Even a sea must pull back before it can return. The dead that do not rest are an obscenity to small hearts and a balance to larger minds that remember how many harvests were saved by wolves thinning the herds. Men mistake themselves for shepherds and then howl when something else wears that coat. The others are not shepherds, but the winter they carry is custody, not tantrum. It is a law so vast that it makes kings look like village elders arguing over a boundary stone. They advance, and the air tightens, and the world remembers that warmth is a negotiation, not a birthright. Fire is a lease signed by the sun. Winter is the owner of the land. The first man to meet one alone did not think of prophecy. He thought of the sound his tongue made when it stuck to his teeth with fear-dried spit. He thought of how blue can be a color that erases all the others, and of how steel, which had solved so much in his life, suddenly solved nothing at all. When his sword sang, their cold answered with a music older than hammers. When he ran, the snow remembered that it had been a river once, and that rivers are patient. If there is hatred in those bright, depthless eyes, it is the hatred of a tide for a sandcastle, without intention, without triumph. If there is mercy, it is measured in blizzards that herd rather than annihilate, in whiteouts that force the lost together under one cloak, in the way a drift will sometimes spare the smallest and swallow the stubborn tall. We tell ourselves that the others are an army because war is the only geometry we learned from our fathers. We whisper that they are a plague because our grandmothers taught us where to put blame when the milk sours. But watch a barrow of deer picked clean and placed carefully in arcs you could lay a compass on. Watch the frost creep in delicate veins around old ruins like lace. Watch the whites left standing in a ring as if to mark a boundary your maps do not recognize, and ask if there is a mind beneath the ice that speaks in arrangements rather than commands. Ask if the long night might have been a reset the world schedules when we squander its light. Men who live past 40 winters know that hunger culls what pride would keep. Men who plant turnips in decades remember that generosity in a warm year is the only way to pay for the cold one. What if the others are the turn of the great wheel that men forgot to oil with mercy? What if we summon them with our exhaustions, with our burnings, with our favorite poison, certainty? It is not that they are kind, it is that they are inevitable, and inevitability is the slowest teacher and the fairest judge. The proof has always been in the small things. The way crows will not complain but simply leave. The way dogs fold their ears back and listen with their shoulders. The way the lantern's glass fogs from the outside when a white walker is near, as if the cold is breathing you in. The faiths of men call the cold a punishment because punishments make narratives easier to bind into sermons. The trees call it candor. Teeth chatter. Oaths rattle in their scabbards. The living band together and relearn how to share a pot and tell a tale and keep a child in the center. And winter files that lesson away in its great library and waits for the next time we grow arrogant enough to lose the habit. When we speak of the Pact, we mean a table laid on an island where faces glow in bark, like coals under ash, and men whose hands knew only the grip of spear and the brace of shield found a new way to hold something, open, not clenched. The first men brought axes that sang the only song they trusted, and the children of the forest brought songs that moved the air without cutting it. The Isle of Faces gathered both and decided it would keep the echo. In that green hush, a treaty wrote itself into wood, and wood wrote itself into memory, and memory turned into the patient pulp of the Weirwoods' dreams. The Pact is not a parchment rolled and sealed. It is a root system. It runs under streams and through graves and beneath the quarrels of kings like a quiet smile. It says this: if you must, bleed. If you can, listen. If you are clever, plant. It says this: not everything that grows has to stand in the sun to matter. It says this: carve your vows where they can outlast your sons. The Weirwood network is not magic in the way Southerners like it, showy, coinable, quick. It is a library that refuses lamps. It stores movement and heat, and the kinds of secrets that only make sense if you slow your thinking to the pace of sap. A greenseer plugs into this slow sea and learns that time is not a road, but a lake, and that your hand can make ripples without ever touching the surface, if you remember your hand being there long enough. The myth that the old gods listen is a courtesy. In truth, you listen to the old gods because they are everywhere you have ever leaned when your knees failed, and everywhere your mother told you to be quiet in case something wise spoke. The glass candle is a glamour. The heart tree's eye is a habit. And this is why maesters, who have cooked the wild into broth and served it as knowledge, distrust the red of those leaves. Factories prefer clocks. Forests prefer seasons. At the Citadel, they say progress in a voice that tastes of iron. In the Godswood, they say patience and mean exactly the same thing. Was the Pact ever broken? In 1,000 small ways every year, and in one great way, perhaps only once, when men forgot that treaties are not spells, but chores. You cannot sign a peace and then let it starve. You must feed it with visits and marriages and festivals that turn enemies into cousins, and cousins into nuisances, and nuisances into neighbors. The Isle of Faces is a reminder that you cannot win against a forest. You can only ask it to host you, and then try not to be rude. When the snows came hard, and the men who had sworn to share the milk and the fire began to count instead, the trees looked away and let them fail their own math. To call that punishment is to call gravity a vendetta. It is simply the world continuing to be itself, while we experiment with being people. On long afternoons of grey light, a boy in a tower learned that windows are time's first classroom. He pressed his hands to cold stone and felt the history of a family travel through his palms. He fell and woke a new animal. In the cave, when he reached for a root and found a river, the lesson began in earnest. The past is sturdy in the large and delicate in the small. You can shout mother into yesterday and she will not look up. You can whisper hold the door at the right minute and crack a life like a cup. The weir net does not keep you from drowning. It teaches you how to breathe water and warns you that your bubbles will drift through old rooms and make curtains stir. And some aunt long dead will turn and say, "Did you feel that?" To change a trunk requires a storm. To move a branch, sometimes you need only a bird's weight. Bran learns to be gentle with his weight. He learns to press lightly on a hinge and let it swing without recognizing his touch. He learns to love without claiming, and to see without steeling himself against what looking will do. The story called Hodor became a parable the instant it was told. People pour in their own meanings. Some say fate is cruel and the gods are worse. Some say mercy is soft and softness kills. Some say the boy was right and sorrow is an honest price, and that in a ledger as large as the north, one ruined life balances many spared. Perhaps all of that is too neat. Perhaps the truth is that time is a single animal that does not know where its tail ends and its nose begins, and that sometimes it bites itself because an itch must be scratched and because there is no other way. What Bran learns is humility. A prince in a rags-made cloak learns to tread on yesterdays like snow you do not want to collapse. He learns that the voices of the dead taste like the inside of a winter apple, and that if you bite too hard, the sweetness turns to wood. He learns to leave offerings to the past, fewer corrections, more gratitude. He learns that the present is not merely a result of yesterday's choices, but also a host, responsible for treating its ghosts kindly, even when the ghosts do not remember their own names. These lessons flower in places most men speed through. The barrows of the old kings are not piles of earth, but instruments. They are tuned to winds that only play in certain months. Kneel and you will hear them hum. Put your head to the ground and you will hear bones talk in tones so deep you cannot tell if it is a language or a lullaby. Once, when the world was more truthful with itself, men built doors into the earth to remind themselves which direction to face when humility was required. The Barrow kings wore crowns that wouldn't impress a jeweler and rings that would fit any child, and carried the names of rivers, not saints. The North keeps them not to worship, but to calibrate. Stand there long enough and your pride stops vibrating at the wrong pitch. Stand there long enough and you remember that a frozen field is not dead. It is storing 1,000 green decisions for later. In Winterfell, the crypts companion the living, the way a well-built cellar companions a kitchen. It is not morbid to keep your dead near. It is practical, a final apprenticeship. The lord who must pass his own stone face on his way to supper tends to season his commands with thought. The boy who learns his forebears by touch will recognize purchase points on a wall that will help him climb when the hour arrives to escape or to rescue. Down there the air smells like iron and chalk and tail-end fires. And somewhere a mouse writes its own history in the dust. The statues hold swords, and the realm argues in taverns and in towers over whether those blades will ever be needed again in the way the old wives meant when they said the kings of winter would rise if the dead marched. But even without stepping an inch, those blades do their work. They point at whatever enters and ask, is this a threat or a guest? They remind sons that a weapon left alone is less dangerous than one carried to prove a point. They remind daughters that the only locks that last are the ones the living refuse to pick. And if the dead were ever to ask something of us, it would sound like common sense. Keep your promises. Keep your fires. Keep your children in the middle. When the old tales say Dragonsteel, they are naming a practical grace. Dragonsteel is no more mystical than good bread, which is grain, water, salt, time, heat, and hands. A sword that answers winter is ore, fold, quench, temper, and a craftsman's stubborn affection for perfection. Call it Valyrian, call it the dawn metal, call it the sky that fell and remembered its edge. Every name is a way to place reverence on human patience married to the world's heart. The first man who lifted a dragonsteel blade in the cold and saw it refuse the frost felt no miracle, only the dignity of a tool as reliable as morning. Later we added songs and pyres and gasps and the theatre of lineage. The metal does not mind. It wants work. It wants to register a blue tremor and refuse it. It wants to meet a thing that claims to be forever and politely disagree. This is the northern wisdom. A blade that behaves is kinder than a prayer that doesn't. A wall you can touch is friendlier than a savior whose name you can only shout. A map is less useful than a neighbor. A neighbor is less useful than a family. And a family is everyone who will still cover you with their cloak when the wind turns old and starts asking questions. If you hold this wisdom in your mouth like a coin you are afraid to spend, the winter will not thank you, because winter is not a person and refuses praise. It will simply make a small space for you at the next storm and say without saying, "Sit here and wait with the rest of us until it passes." In these long nights, you can feel the realm adjusting to that posture. The laughter around the smallest fire carries better than marching songs across a frozen plain. The axe, brought in from the yard and left by the hearth, gives off that smell of sap caught mid-argument. A boy wraps a dog in his own cloak, and in doing so graduates from boyhood without noticing. The others will come as gently as an argument you already lost. The Weirwoods will accept their passage and record it without ornament. Bran will listen and move his weight in places where it will bruise least and heal most. The barrows will thrum. The crypts will purse their stone lips and keep watching, because that is what good elders do. Observe, judge seldom, remember everything. Men with dragon steel will stand, and they will not sing, because singing is for after, when the stew is hot and the bed is soft and the baby has been checked on for the third time, just to be sure. The fight itself will feel like housework, necessary, unglamorous, sometimes surprising, never dignified, always dignifying. And when people put words on it later, they will make it grand, so their children will not be careless. They will make it beautiful, so their grandchildren will not be cruel. If you listen closely now, you can hear the Pact breathing. It sounds like a man apologizing before the woman says it's all right. It sounds like the river slowing under a lid of ice and not resenting the lid. It sounds like a hearth when the last log has fallen into itself and become ember, and the house has decided that is enough light for now. The North is not a place so much as a habit of mind. Finish your work early, boil extra water, count the blankets, keep the sharp things oiled, and do not speak too loudly when there is a child asleep in the next room. In that habit, omens look less like commands and more like calendars. Prophecies look less like destinies and more like riddles you solve together while peeling turnips. Tonight, the wind has the good manners to consult the chimneys before it decides how to proceed. The ravens practice their vowels in the dark. An ant, confused in a beam of torchlight, discovers the lip of a stone and chooses to go around instead of over. A great white shadow far away regards a herd and takes 3 and lets the rest scatter, because the world cannot afford a scythe that does not tire. Someone puts their hand on a heart tree and receives a memory that tastes like wintergreen and coughs once and smiles. Someone opens a door in the crypt and closes it again and decides to sit with their father a while longer before going back up. Someone runs a whetstone down a blade and hears, in the small song it makes, the promise that this steel will do its part when the hour calls. It is easy to fear the night if you learned it from lanterns. It is easier to respect it if you learned it from your grandparents. The others are an exam that does not care whether you studied. The Weirwoods are a teacher that will keep nodding even if you fell asleep. Bran is the student who realized that the final is cumulative. The barrows are the room the test is taken in. The crypts are the hall you walk down afterward, knowing you forgot a page, but also that you remembered to write your name. Dragonsteel is the pencil that does not break when you press too hard. Sleep now, in the way the North does. With one ear not for danger, but for duty, with your boots near the bed, not because you will need to run, but because you promise you will go fetch more wood if the fire asks. Dream a pattern that does not frighten you, because you have already agreed to abide by it. Dream a pact that does not bind so much as remind. Dream a boy who touches yesterday and treats it kindly. Dream kings who took their crowns off when they came inside and set them quietly on a peg by the door. Dream a sword that says, "Not I will save you, but I will help." Dream a winter that is not a villain but a season. A night that is not an abyss but a pause. A people who are not heroes but neighbors. Dream a spiral in the snow that is not a threat but a map, and step where the empty spaces invite you, one careful footfall at a time, until the shape opens like a flower you did not expect to bloom in this weather, and in the center of it you find what you always find in the North when you finally arrive. A small fire, a small bowl, a small room, and someone already there, making space for you with a nod. In the city where all gods share one roof, and even their silences have different flavors, a door opens on hinges that never squeak, and cool air folds around a traveler like a second cloak. The House of Black and White accepts the step without asking for a name. Names come in with dust and go out with water. Inside there is only the balance of a mercy that learned to walk in many shoes. Candles blink like sleepy eyes. A coin sings faintly in a pocket as if it misses a palm that warmed it once. Here the prayers of the desperate settle like silt in a slow river. Here the living come to practice the art of leaving gently. The faceless do not deny the sting of parting. They guide it to become a needle instead of a hook. They call their work a gift because gifts change hands cleanly. The first gift was given in a darkness far below the world's proudest city, where slaves tasted sulfur and salt and knew their chains by the ache in their lungs. The mines under Valyria taught a scale of pain too wide for a human throat to sing, so the song became a whisper, and the whisper asked for release. The first of the many-faced heard that small music and answered with an exit that did not mock the sender. A god who is all gods can be anywhere someone cannot bear one more day. A temple that is every temple can live in one house and fill the rest of the earth with its attendants, the quiet, the patient, the unnoticeable, the ones who understand that to erase oneself is not to vanish, but to become a passage. Between the stone bowls and the calm reflections that ripple across them, the art of no one is learned like a lullaby, softly, by repetition, until your mouth can shape it without thinking. To be no one is not to be nothing. It is to be the space a kindness flows through. It is to be a listening shaped like a person. A girl once brought a list into such a room and found that a list is heavier than it looks, and that each line on it wants a story before it will lie still. She washed bodies and learned how stubborn warmth can be, and how tender cold is when it finally arrives. She learned to wear a face the way a nurse wears night, comfortably, aware of its weight, careful with its edges. She learned that to take a life without cruelty is a discipline, and that discipline is a bed that never fully warms and never needs to. In the market outside, the fishmonger and the spice seller and the man who mends nets all pass each other with the relief that the city's worst leak has valves. When the faceless step into those crowds, the city becomes watertight enough for sleep. In the great balance that turns night into morning, the many-faced tilt their finger only where it keeps the rest from sliding into a ditch. Once, in the long-ago days when dragons were a calendar and arrogance a harvest, there came a day when the 14 flames coughed and the world held its breath. Some say the doom was an accident in the forge of the earth. Some say it was a bill come due at a table where every course had been bought with other people's hunger. Some say a prayer in a mine became a wind in a palace, and the valley that taught men to treat fire like a pet finally decided to run back into the wild. You can imagine the last hour in the manors, bookshelves losing their temper, marble floors turning into tide, chains thinking finally of all the wrists they had met. In the tunnels below, maybe a saint of smoke laid a hand on a miner's shoulder and said it was time. Maybe 1,000 small mercies occurred at once. A cup of water found a mouth. A child was lifted. A decision was uncoupled from pride. The faceless do not boast that they pulled a continent apart. If they speak of those days at all, it is to remind the room that empires and illnesses both end most often because they have forgotten how to listen. The gift has limits and refuses spectacle. It wants to be the sigh at the right moment, the closed eyes that do not condemn, the hand that takes a blade from the floor and sets it quietly where it cannot be reached by someone who is hurting. It is a theology of untangling in a world that worships bright crowns and loud victories. The house keeps the lamps low and the voices lower, and yet its influence walks the roads like a pilgrim who left before dawn and will arrive after dusk without having asked any village for a bed. In the rooms where faces are hung like reminders, the acolyte learns that the first face to remove is fear, and that after it falls, the others slip free like damp leaves. To be no one is to be able to become anyone for a moment. In order to set down a burden, they cannot. The mask is not a lie. It is a bridge that does not expect thanks. Far to the southwest, on a spit of land that pretends to be an island so it can hold its dignity, there rises a citadel of men who braid the world into a chain and wear it close to their throats as if knowledge were a kind of muffler against the drafts of ignorance. The maesters measure, record, refine, repeat. Their faith is that the world, when rubbed enough with questions, will shine its secrets into usefulness. Links are forged from different metals to honor the crafts of mind: silver for healing, black iron for ravenry, pewter for maps, brass for the stars. There are whispered links as well, not worn so often where eyes can reach them. A Valyrian steel sliver for those who play respectfully with the old fires. A dragon glass curl for the ones who can keep a secret from their own sleep. In the library's deep lungs, shelves inhale and exhale dust in a rhythm older than any student and softer than any sermon. Lamps burn whale oil because it does not flare. Bells tell the hour and are not in the habit of being wrong. The citadel's kindness is practical, an herb pressed into a wound at the right minute, a fever read correctly in the shade of an ear, a raven coaxed into believing that a message is a branch worth landing on. Its suspicion is equally practical. Magic is Thorm, and Thorm, multiplied by panic and pride, makes disasters harder to predict and far more costly to mop up. The archmaesters of a certain stripe look at glass candles and see a series of fires that did not stay where they were put, They look at pyromancers and see clerks who fell in love with sparks. They look at prophecy and see a distracted man's excuse to be rude to the present. A faction within that wisdom long ago began to nudge life away from theater and toward craft, away from thunder and toward grain. You can read this as a quiet war if you wish. You can also read it as a long housekeeping, taking the flamboyant out with the trash because it stains paperwork. But the flame remembers how to be a conversation, and from time to time the glass candles wake like old men who nap badly. In the lonely hours, a candle reveals that distances have been lying. It shows one student another's face across a sea and lets their eyes meet and exchange truths that couriers could never carry. Marwyn the mage keeps rooms that smell like boats and deserts, and a skull dull with age. He is the citadel's itch, the one it cannot scratch without drawing blood. He mutters the impolite question, what if knowledge is bigger than comfort? He writes letters that travel farther than ravens should, and his boots remember cities the chain would rather forget. When he speaks of dragons, he does it without romance, as if they were a subset of weather, dangerous, measurable, occasionally useful to a crop of kings. In the scriptorium, apprentices learn the patience of a millstone, and that is a form of goodness. Out in the wider rooms of the realm, though, that goodness can look like a blindfold. When a comet cuts the sky, the citadel reaches for tables and old reports. When a girl walks out of fire with 3 small reasons to revise a century of doctrine, the citadel clears its throat and asks for references. This is not malice. It is the reflex of men who fear that awe will steal their tools. And yet the chain lies warm on a chest all the same, and some nights a link hums because a dream brushed it. The maesters are not enemies of wonder. They are wardens of sturdiness, and in a world that loves to fall in love with its own stories, sturdiness is an unglamorous miracle. Elsewhere, silk laughs against silk, and a lantern finds a cheekbone just so, and a man with no sigil painted on his door keeps a kingdom in his pocket the way a careful cook keeps salt. Never too much, always enough. Varys is a map of corridors. He knows which ones echo, which swallow sound, which require the dignity of a slower step. He believes in the realm as if it were a child left in the next room. Sleeping, yes, but prone to stirring if voices rise. He debones news with a surgeon's care and serves it without gristle to the men who think they are eating meat. Another man, Illyrio, keeps a smile that has learned how to host secrets without sweating. He wears comfort convincingly because someone has to be comfortable while hazard is being shepherded. They play a game with an hourglass that flips itself when they blink. Between them, a boy who may be a prince learns to hold his fork correctly. He is taught not only to bow but when not to, and that lesson saves more lives than a sword will. They bring him through the alleys of exile, as if guiding a sail through a narrow harbor. No banging, no snagging, no boasts shouted up to balconies. He is painted with the careful hand of a forger who signs a masterpiece someone else once started and left unfinished. If his blood is not what the tale requires, his conduct may be, and conduct clothes a throne more thoughtfully than lineage ever did. Varys speaks in riddles because he understands that power is a story's obedience to a voice. Illyrio speaks in pleasures because he understands that people obey a story best when it flatters them. Together, they build a ladder that does not look like a ladder, made from favors, debts, gratitude, and fear, the 4 fibers that never fray when braided. This patience is not clean. It allows a fire to lick one city while saving water for another. It moves a mother without asking about her child. It does not apologize to men whose pride it tripped. But at its gentlest, the spider's art is guardianship. He looks at a market and hears it breathe and knows whether a single soldier posted at the well will ease a week or provoke a month. He looks at a boy and sees whether kindness will be taken for weakness or for weather. He places a candle in a window 3 nights in a row because the man who must see it is too stubborn to look up on the first 2. He sends birds because birds are better than drums. They arrive without telling the street who the message belongs to. Power, he says once to a man who would rule, is the shadow on a wall, and men agree to fear it. If the realm has a prayer, it is that the shadow be shaped by hands that are steady. That is why he befriends a prince and a beggar with the same hospitality. That is why his robes do not jingle when he walks. That is why, when a door must close on one future so that another can be tried, he makes sure the latch catches softly, because the sound of a slammed door travels too far and wakes babies. On salt, sticky decks, where the wood wears scars like jewelry, and the sails remember 1,000 storms in the way, they sigh even when there is no wind. A man with a blue mouth tells the sea a secret, and the sea pretends to be surprised. Euron Greyjoy is a smile with a missing piece. He learned long ago that fear is a better rope than love, because it does not fray when left in the rain. He wears a crow's eye not because he believes in omens, but because men who do are easier to steer if you look like the omen they expected. Shade of the evening stains his lips the way certain truths stain a life. He drinks it like a man housebreaking a dragon. In the corners of the world where maps thin and rumor fattens, he has walked into rooms whose floors were the backs of fish and whose ceilings were made of drowned prayers. He has learned songs that unsettle anchors. He keeps a horn that claims to make dragons remember a word older than fire. Dragonbinder is a promise written in pain. It teaches with heat and asks no permission. Its note is not music, but instruction. And instruction is a kind of love when given by a parent, and a kind of theft when blasted by a pirate. Euron holds it like a priest holds a relic with half belief and full appetite. He will blow it because what matters to him is not whether it works, but whether everybody watches him try. If the world is a door, he wants to be the draft you feel even when it is shut. On the deck of silence, the crew is the loudest absence. Tongues taken make a choir that never interrupts the sermon. In that hush, Euron can hear the world he intends, one in which prayer is a type of weather he controls, one in which gods are not killed but humiliated, one in which a queen across the sea is a lighthouse he will either climb or topple, depending on which will teach the town more about looking. He wraps himself in theonomy, god language bent into a sail, and goes hunting for the whale that ate the first king. He does not want riches so much as reactions. Gold is a mirror that shows him smaller than a scream does. The Ironborn admire him because he is the sharpest version of an old joke. What is dead may never die, but it changes shape into something that can swim further than your father did. There are depths beyond the black of ordinary night. Euron seeks them the way other men seek approval. The maesters compute him and get remainders that annoy them. The red priests bless against him and find their flames showing them his grin anyway. The faceless would not waste a face on him unless the balance asked it. The trees do not say his name. He is not a villain to them, only weather. Yet even weather learns from the land it crosses. If he ever saw the North's habit of small fires and remembered children, he would call it weakness and miss the secret. That is how walls outlast conquerors. He will sail past such rooms, too busy examining a storm that might eat the sky. And the sky will indulge him once, maybe twice, because even heaven's like a story told with confidence. Then it will turn as skies do, and let him be a lesson for sailors. Do not drink anything that makes you forget to count your crew. Still, before lessons, there are moments when wonder arrives, even for a man built like a dare. In the ruins of a city that thought its alphabet could outshout geology, he ran his hand along a wall that had been sand once and would be sand again, and in that instant he felt how much of power is simply the patience to turn stone back into grain. In a night market across the Jade Sea, he watched a woman teach a drum to tell the truth and knew that he would never own that, no matter how many tongues he cut. In the silence's hold, among artifacts and insults he calls trophies, there are also little things he forgets to boast about. A child's wooden trout, a cracked tile painted with a flower, a lamp whose wick smells like home. These are the parts of him that sleep when he drinks, and sometimes wake when he stares too long at the line, where water stops being dark and starts being lighter dark. In the courts and cellars and decks and towers, masks do the work of daylight. They protect the eye long enough for it to adjust. The faceless mask teaches a hand how to be soft even when it must be steady. The maester's chain is a mask that lets fear sit in a corner while method cooks a better soup. Varys's perfume is a mask that lets truth drift into a room without startling anyone. Euron's smile is a mask that tells men what they want to be afraid of, so he can make them forget the sensible fears: hunger, winter, mistakes. The realm breathes through these coverings and sometimes forgets to lift them. When it does, it exhales a clarity that smells like iron and rain. Sleep in that clarity. Imagine a temple of every god, and the patience of the priests who mop the floor after grief leaves. Imagine a library where the candles wake sometimes, and a student who knows when to close the book and go learn from wind. Imagine a kitchen where two plotters taste a stew and change a nation's supper by adding only salt. Imagine a ship whose name is an order, and the man who mistakes obedience for worship. Imagine the masks stacked at the foot of a bed, each one a tool, each one a warning, each one an invitation to be gentler tomorrow. If the doom was a wake-up, let it teach sleep as well, that not all flames must be worshipped, that not all chains must be worn, that not all horns must be blown, that not all riddles are traps. The gift will keep its door open. The chain will keep its links from rust. The spiders will keep their birds. The crow will keep his storms. And you, close your eyes and keep the simplest thing of all, the knowing that power, when it remembers it is alone, can tuck the world in and dim the lamp and step quietly from the room. Eastward. The sea loosens its braid and falls into long silk, and a lantern at the prow draws a soft circle where water changes its mind about being dark, a flicker where chart and myth shake hands. There is a quiet hour before the wind's decision, when a captain can hear old promises humming under the planks, a thin thread of sound that ties the present to places where the maps stop pretending they know. In that hour, the horn stories return, not as boasts but as lullabies with iron in them, whispers about instruments that do not ask to be learned so much as endured, whose notes are not notes, but instructions the world remembers because it knew them first. One horn is black as quenched moonlight, a coil of Valyrian hunger etched with letters that feel hot even to eyes, a thing men call Dragonbinder because men love the illusion that naming breaks a bit off of power and puts it in their pocket. To hold it is to feel a fever crawl up the arm and begin to recite your life in reverse. To blow it is to find that breath can turn traitor, that a rib cage is a bell the sound strikes from within, that your mouth has become a doorway and the price of opening it is you. The horn's voice is not music, but a spoken claim, an old law announced aloud, a leash made of heat that slips around a dragon's throat and reminds it of a word older than fire and smaller than pride. And yet even that obedience is not ownership. It is borrowed awe, a storm wearing your hat for the length of a scream. The sea stores other horns. In the north of tales, a king of giants or a king of rags, depending on who is telling the tale and how many logs are left for the night, once lifted a different mouth of darkness and spoke through it until the mountains remembered they had been waves once, and the wall remembered that it is possible for a straight line to learn humility. Joramun's horn is a rumor that can topple stone because belief, if repeated long enough in cold air, becomes a tool. They say it can wake things that should stay sleeping or put to bed the hubris that keeps us from sharing blankets when the wind begins to search the tents. The men who love it best love not the sound, but the idea that a single breath might change an age. Between the black horn that binds and the deep horn that unbinds lies the truth that music is a bargain, and every bargain has a ghost clause, and the ghost is always the listener. The bodies that blew Dragonbinder burned from the inside, the way a torch dies when it tries to light a bigger fire than it knows how to carry. The men who dream Joramun's blast hear stone learning to say yes and do not ask what else must agree. Horns are doors. They do not care who walks through. They care that the hinges are old and the house remembers every visitor. If you lean over the rail at night and let the spray kiss your mouth, salt will write a line there that tastes older than kings. Somewhere to the southeast, a city of handsome liars wears gates like jewelry. A place that sells purity by the flask and mystery by the bolt. And within its bright pretenses sits a house that lives in shadow, the way a patient lives in a bed. The house of the Undying does not tower, it thickens. It does not shine, it waits. It does not welcome, it allows. A girl with ash dreams once took a sip of indigo and found that her tongue had learned 3 new verbs: to follow, to forget, to forgive. She walked into a corridor that behaved like a river in winter, fixed and flowing, and the doors arranged themselves according to a logic that did not ask for respect, only attention. This is how the house speaks, with rooms that resemble you, with paths that reward an unhurried eye, with visions that feel like the back of your own teeth when you run your tongue there to think. 3 fires, said the old whisper that had been repeated so often it had become a kind of furniture in the mind. 3 mounts, 3 treasons, and behind each number a cupboard of meanings, knives wrapped in velvet. The house did not explain. It showed. A child suckled stone and called it sweet because her hunger had learned the trick of turning anything into mother. A city of spires melted into a plain of crosses that wore men, and the wind prayed without words, and it was not redemption and not sentence. Only a ledger open to the page where the debt and the habit share a border. A man with silver in his hair and gall in his smile offered a crown made of the idea that the past can be reclaimed by an angrier present, and the house let the crown droop into smoke and blow away because smoke is the final honesty of metal, and crowns do not like honesty. A door stood ajar on a room where strangers wept for a king in a language that would not travel far west, and a shadow of a dragon crossed a city that had not seen one, and the cross-hatching of wings on stone felt like a map, and a warning both. What are these visions, if not a cookbook for mercy, written by people who had only ever learned conquest by heart? What are these prophecies, if not reminders that timing is a character in every story, and that patience is not a servant, but a sovereign that refuses to wear jewels? The House of the Undying does not pretend it speaks for gods, it speaks for memory, and memory is a god when it wants to be, and a thief when we are bored, and a nurse when we bleed. It held up a mirror to a girl whose name had been traded like a coin, and showed her how to refuse interest and demand principle. It taught that treason can be love if it betrays cruelty, that mounts can be duties disguised as beasts, that fires can be old orders burning away to make room for the smallest good. Not all visions are correct. The right ones are useful. Not all doors lead somewhere. The important thing is learning which ones to close politely and never reopen, no matter how they sigh your name. Sail farther than the maps like to confess, and the world grows speculative. Names stretch, mountains pretend to be clouds. Rivers marry the sea under oaths no priest hears. There are lands that remember a morning longer than our calendars will admit. A great empire that dressed its emperors in a sequence of jewels the way dawn dresses the horizon. Pearl that answered to first light. Jade that held spring in its pocket. Amethyst that drank twilight and smiled with purple teeth. And onyx that took the night inside and called it throne. They tell of a maiden made of light who married the day, and a lion of night who married silence, and out of that union a dynasty that walked across centuries like a patient cat, each paw set down where another had been lifted. Then came a season the poets can describe only by subtraction, a loss so complete that time looked in the mirror and did not recognize its own eyes. Lamps learned how to be sarcasm. Children learned how to speak without moving their mouths. The long night in the east is not an event, but a mood. And moods win because they wait. The great empire of the dawn is used now the way distant ancestors are used in the West, as a shelf to put too heavy questions on. Were there dragons that ate starlight and exhaled calendars? Did emperors decide how much mercy to allow over the whole earth the way a farmer decides how much water to spare for the pumpkins? Did Ahai drink the shadow out of the sky and become so intoxicating it forgot to taste anything else? In the alleys where yellow lanterns dream and cats keep books with their tails, you will find very old men who will tell you that history is a wheel because the gods like to be entertained by repetition, and thus they reschedule apocalypses the way choirmasters reschedule rehearsals. This week, that day, this hour, different soloist. The truth is not elegant. The truth is that people forget the small disciplines that keep light cheap: sharing, checking, shoveling, singing. The cycles of night arrive when we break the habit of kindness and reward the habit of extraction. The proof lives in small numbers. Count how many neighbors your marketplaces have turned into rivals. Count how many songs you have replaced with slogans. Count how many steps it takes to find a child with a blanket who is not your child and share the blanket anyway. The cycle reverses there, quietly. Dawn is not glamorous. It is a stubborn appointment. In Yi Ti, the calendars sprawl like gardens, and the poets make a living arguing with the almanacs. In Leng, the trees remember a height that embarrasses history. In Ashi, the shadows are not longer than anywhere else. They are denser, and men get drunk on density the way they do on rare wines. It is said you can learn any magic there if you have the patience to ignore your health, that you can buy a map of your own death there if you do not mind mistaking the map for the road. Some things are true because they are beautiful. Some things are beautiful because they have learned to pretend truth. Ahai's lesson is how to look at glamour without making a home in it. If you must go, go with a friend who likes to laugh, and take turns being the one who says this is nonsense, and then the one who says this is serious, and in that rotation you might smuggle yourself back intact. If the East carries answers, it carries them in baskets with holes. You take what you can, and what you lose on the walk home feeds the next traveler. Turn the wheel back to steel, and place two ideas side by side, like tools on a bench. One is Lightbringer, the blade of legend quenched in the heart of love. A story that has ruined as many evenings as it has saved mornings. A myth so persuasive it makes decent men practice cruelty, in case cruelty is a key to a door they are too frightened not to open. The other is Dorne, a sword that was not forged exactly so much as found. A length of fallen sky taught how to behave by hands that believed in kindness more than they believed in ceremony. Lightbringer asks for a cost that makes tyrants feel tender about themselves. It performs a trick where it convinces the wielder that suffering is tuition. Dorne simply asks for maintenance. Wipe it, oil it, keep your word when you wear it. Do not point it at anyone you are not willing to weep over later. The Danes keep Dorne at Starfall the way a family keeps a last letter, a thing small enough to hide and big enough to organize a sentry around. They remember men who made it dance in a tower where mourning made every stone honest, and women whose names were blamed for sorrows men caused, and children who learn that sometimes a blade can be a comfort if it is unwilling to play a role it was not born for. Starfall does not bow to the idea that only blood makes right. It bows to the quieter idea that kinship is conduct repeated until it becomes a nature. So the sword passes to the worthiest, not always to the nearest, and in that stubbornness the world is made a notch safer. When you pick up a fallen star, you owe the sky a promise. I will not pretend this light is mine. I will return it when I am done. I will use it to read, not to brag. Across war rooms and bedchambers and ship decks and temple floors, people have tried to make Lightbringer real by hurting someone they swore they loved. The result is not light, it is theater. There are nights when a man must choose between the cold and a hard act, and the stories will tell you that the hard act makes the warmer dawn. They leave out the smell. They leave out the silence afterward, and the way the blade looks at its owner and refuses to be proud. The blade that saves the world will not need a stage. It will need a hand that is not greedy, and a wrist that does not tremble, and a shoulder that can still sleep after putting it down. If the dawn we want requires making the night crueler than it already is, we want the wrong day. There is another kind of fallen star that never becomes a sword. It is the small astonishment that arrives when you finally listen long enough to hear your enemy chew. It is the brief mercy that appears when the horn you were certain would carry the wall away turns out to be only a big sound in a small chest. It is the way a dragon looks smaller when it lands to drink, and in that scale you remember that everything must fold itself to fit the ground. What does the world want from us in its eras of fire and stone and far tides? Less pronouncement, more practice. Less music that orders, more songs that gather. Less worship of devices, more care for the hands that hold them. Even the black horn will calm if you put it in a dark room and do not visit it with ambition. Even the wall will respect you if you keep its steps shoveled and do not ask it to be poetry. Even a vision will settle into being a memory you can store in a safe place and not press on until it bleeds allegory. and even a sword will forgive you if you learn to treat it like a broom most days, and only like a lightning bolt when the storm refuses to hear reason. In the East, they tell a story about a god who retired. He put his crown on a river rock, and it became lichen. He put his scepter in a child's hand, and it became a reed flute. He put his thunder in a cupboard, and it became grain. All the people knew to do was to keep those things from being stolen. Saving the world is mostly custodial. Imagine Daenerys in a room where the future tried to audition for her, and she learned to cast the present instead. Imagine a horn locked in a chest wrapped in rope, the rope wrapped in doubt, the doubt wrapped in good sense, and the chest thrown overboard, because sometimes the sea is the best archivist. Imagine a prince who was built out of rumor learning to become a man out of acts, one deed at a time, and discovering that kingship is a coat you earn by carrying other people's weather. Imagine a wall that will one day come down because the world no longer needs that kind of line, and when it falls, it does so gently, stone by stone, handed to neighbors who will pave roads and build ovens and make schools with the old fear and teach children to eat at long tables rather than stare north. Some nights, the East feels like a promise you are not ready to keep. Other nights, it feels like a library you are allowed to nap in. If you must look into those shadows, take with you the morning knowledge you learned as a child. Wash your hands before you eat. Share your food. Do not set things on fire just to see what burns. Ask the oldest woman how to survive. Ask the youngest child what the game is. When the lantern lows, trim the wick. When someone is crying, boil water. The great remedies are small and repetitive and unromantic. They win because they are boring enough to be sustainable. The world ends in spectacle and is saved in routine. There is a place on the Jade Sea's edge where the fishermen swear the stars fall in at dawn, like birds, and rise in the evening with salt still on their feathers. There is a canyon beyond Kadath where sound takes a breath and returns as a different word, and it is easy there to put your name into the air and receive a stranger in return. There is a square in Yin where a painting shows a river exactly as it will look in 1,000 years, provided people remember not to poison it. And the painter keeps a bowl for coins, not because he is hungry for money, but because he is conducting an experiment in generosity. If enough coins appear, the river lives. If they do not, he will paint the same river with bones in it, and still the brush will be beautiful, and beauty will not save anything without the boring help of kindness. Sleep now with horns far away, and doors chosen with care. Let the visions that sought to rent your heart become quilts folded at the foot of the bed, to be used when the night decides to be longer than planned. Let the fallen star remain a story until duty asks it to be a tool. And even then, hold it as if you will put it back in the sky when you are through. Let the empires of dawn be reminders that chronology is vain, that what matters is cycles of decency, that light is a habit before it is a spectacle. Let the dragons be what they have always been in their best moments, proof that wild power can be taught a grammar if you insist on please and thank you. The ship slides on, and the lantern draws its small circle of consent down upon the sea. The crew do not speak because the sea is speaking, and they have learned to listen. Somewhere east, a city rehearses dawn. Somewhere west, a field remembers summer. Somewhere north, a wall dreams of being a road. Somewhere south, a temple counts breaths. Here, in this moving room, you can belong to all of them long enough to sleep. And when you wake, The world will not have changed its mind about being difficult, but it will have remembered you, and that is enough. And enough is what Dawn asks, and Dawn will return for as long as it is invited, and we invite it with the smallest acts repeated until they are the weather of a life. Westward the roads come home with a sigh, a long exhalation through gates that learned to creak less during war, and now prefer to whisper when carts roll in heavy with potatoes and quiet. Fields that had memorized fire relearn the grammar of dew. Broken blades become pruning hooks that remember fighting only when sunlight slips along their edges and makes them look briefly dangerous before the next bud softens the thought. In courtyards where banners once argued, lines of laundry speak calmly in many colors, and the wind reads them like a book about ordinary angels. The realm begins again in a language that has no word for triumph, and many for enough. The old throne that cut everyone who loved it too much has been persuaded into usefulness, its teeth filed into plowshares and hinges, and a bell that will not lie, not even when a prince is born or a storm pretends to be a celebration. Once men gathered around iron to feel important. Now they gather around bread to feel safe. The songs adjust accordingly. No one forgets the music of marching, but a new chorus takes the center. Need, rise, share, sleep. In a smoky tavern, someone proves the future by paying a stranger's tab. In a village by a river that learned to carry soldiers more gently, a woman teaches her child the names of boats and the names of birds, and makes sure the child knows which will save you first. There is a king who is a remembering, a body shaped like a crown only because his mind reaches backward so far that the present feels politely escorted instead of commanded. He does not sit as much as he settles, like snow deciding the exact amount of silence a field requires. People call him Bran with an intimacy they do not extend to kings easily, because he looks at them as if the room itself requested their company, and he is merely grateful to be included. On his better days, he moves the weight he learned from roots and rivers with the skill of a surgeon, nudging an hour here, a door there, a conversation 2 minutes earlier, so a grief can be caught and folded like a letter meant to be kept. On his worst days, he is tired in places men cannot see, and his counselors learn to call for porridge and patience and let the past release him in its own time. A council grows around him that prefers chairs to thrones and arguments to proclamations. They discover that the wheel does not need to be broken with a hammer when it can be taken apart with questions and reassembled with room for hands that were never asked to touch it before. A smith who once made swords learns the delicate heat of hinges. A baker who once hid coin in crust to smuggle hope into a city learns how to count other people's mercy without insulting it. A woman who once translated 4 kings for the same market day becomes master of whispers and insists on the word master being available to anyone with a mastery. The realm, which loved to pretend it was an animal with one head, enjoys having many heads for once and discovers that hydras are only dangerous when they are hungry. A raven takes a message north, where the air is thinner and therefore easier to breathe if your lungs like honesty. The queen in the north reads the parchment, smiles because the ink remembers who sent it, and then folds it into a shape that will fit into her sleeve without complaining. She walks the walls of a castle that has outlived its builders and its destroyers, and has decided to adopt whoever behaves. Winterfell answers to Sansa the way an old hound answers to a voice it has known since the yard was taller than the child in it. Laws are useful. Customs are kinder. She stitches one to the other until they lie flat. When southern envoys come with gifts wrapped in compliments, she unwraps the compliments first and sets them aside to use as bandages later. When the river freezes in a pattern her maester cannot match to any chart, she asks the children if the ice is trying to tell them a game. And when the tallest child nods, the council reschedules itself to make room for play. North of there, beyond the last garden where the cabbage learns to be brave, a man who has had more names than he asked for becomes again the smallest thing he remembers being, a watcher who prefers mending to boasting. Jon walks with the free folk, like someone who finally took his boots off after a long march and discovered the earth still wants him. The ghosts he carries learn the routes of the migrating herds and tire themselves into good behavior. A new pact is signed without ceremony every time someone shares a fire who used to steal them, and every time a child tells a joke that makes Snow laugh. If there is a kingdom beyond the wall, it elects itself every morning when the first kettle steams. Ravens draw circles over camps to teach the old men that walls are not the only geometry, and to teach the young that circles are just lines that remembered to come home. At a western edge that maps once left uncolored because cartographers are cautious poets, a small ship writes its long sentence across gentle water. Arya holds the wheel the way you hold a friend's secret, careful to listen for the new weight in the old wood. The sea misbehaves adorably, and then, with a gravity only sailors respect, shows her a light that might be a city or a prank of air, or the spine of a fish the size of a hill thinking about turning over. She names islands after people who taught her how to stand. She finds a port where the stars are arranged in a chant she has never heard, and learns to hum it on deck when the crew forgets how to be brave. West is not an answer. It is an appetite. She eats with it, makes rules with it, and sleeps with a dagger under her pillow, not because she expects anyone to be foolish, but because the habit is how she thanks the girl who survived long enough to become someone who does not always need it. South, where the sun rehearses abundance and sometimes gets carried away, Dorne decides again what it prefers to be, a place that negotiates heat with shade rather than conquest with parade. There are rumors of a sword at Starfall that still refuses arrogance, as if arrogance were a stain it recognizes. Dorne lies quiet, and quiet is a lesson the world still resists. The Danes keep their courtesy sharp. They teach their children to read light like a map, and to lend that map to travelers with the understanding that the road is kinder when it is shared. A knight who once thought honor was a wall learns that honor is a gate with many hinges, and he oils them with the patience learned from failing publicly. Oathkeeper means not only the wearer, but the people who agree to be kept by it. And this mutuality spreads through the marches like chamomile, small, sturdy, a medicine you can drink daily without becoming bored. In Old Town, the chain rattles less and listens more. The Archmaesters who mutter at candles that dare to burn in colors outside the textbook have grandchildren now, and grandchildren specialize in encouraging their elders to laugh at things that used to frighten them. A new link is proposed, forged of something unromantic like tin, and awarded for listening. The test is simple. The candidate must hear 3 ideas that contradict his favorite and repeat them fairly while keeping a plant alive. The plant is not a metaphor. The plant is a plant. And men who once prided themselves on killing dragons with footnotes discover that their hands tremble when faced with the delicate tyranny of watering schedules. Marwyn returns often enough to push the furniture an inch, and then leaves again before anyone can ask if miracles will be offered at breakfast. He does not mind that the library shelves still prefer dust to drama. Dust is a good teacher and knows when to keep its mouth shut. Across the narrow sea, favors mature. Letters arrive smelling of cinnamon and of the fish markets of cities that love their own noise. A boy who once practiced princely handshakes until they became reflex unlearns his posture and learns how to pick up a child without making the child a prop. If he was built of rumor, he is becoming a man out of errands. Bread delivered, meetings kept, a punchline learned and told properly to a veteran who needed to laugh. The spiders and the magisters and the slick men who sell tomorrow wholesale adjust their theories as they always have, when tomorrow avoids being bought. In their private rooms they admit to themselves that it is easier to manage the hungry than the fed and harder, but lovelier, to manage the content. The great redistributions do not look like pageants. They look like fewer clenched jaws at dusk. Somewhere a horn slumbers under 12 quilts because someone sensible put it there, and because someone even more sensible reminded the household that quilts are heavier than glory. It is not destroyed because destruction is another kind of worship. It is kept and ignored the way you keep and ignore a story you outgrew without malice. Somewhere a glass candle burns politely for correspondence and refuses to show stunts on request. Its light is used to locate a lost button, and the relief that follows is a miracle too small for priests, but large enough for the person who needed the button. Somewhere far from Dragonstone and from sermons, eggs do what eggs do when left undisturbed in a warm place where kindness has been a habit. If something wakes inside them, it will be because the world deserves the risk again, not because anyone blew a note that forced a legend to kneel. The faith sets its candles at the edge of God's woods and discovers that colored glass and red leaves look well together when they are not arguing. Septons learn to bless bread baked with pine needles when the river floods and the mill is ashamed of drowning. A mother who refuses to kneel at either altar is not scolded. She is asked for her recipe because her children do not cough in winter. Priests who once traded certainty for status find that a smaller congregation is a sharper chisel. They tell the truth more often now because there is less applause to addict them. The old gods continue to be excellent at being quiet, and are therefore in fashion again among people who keep bees, who know the difference between noise and news. On the Trident, a new kind of toll is established. Tell a story that is not about you, and you may cross for free. Ferrymen collect legends the way kings used to collect scars. A mummer's troupe invents a play so gentle and so piercing that soldiers cry without shame, and farmers blush because it is a little too true about the way we save the wrong wine for the wrong days. Lannisters and Starks, Tyrells and Greyjoys, Tullys and Arryns and Martells, names that once wore antlers and wings like orders now wear aprons and tool belts and teach apprentices whose talent is to ignore surnames. The realm becomes a surname with a first name, neighbor. If the others were a law and dragons a spectacle and prophecies an inheritance with too many cousins, the future wishes to be a habit. It asks to be fed at the same times, to be mended when it tears, to be forgiven when it is clumsy. It asks for small courts in large kitchens, for judgments delivered with tea, for schools that smell like chalk and rain, and are proud of both. The map returns to being a piece of paper you can scribble on to get a child to laugh on a day when the sky is stubborn. The heralds rehearse new phrases and find they prefer them: convened, amended, welcomed, thanked. When night arrives correctly, it is not a siege but an invitation. Torches are lit because they are beautiful. not because they are afraid. The watchmen hum because they like the way the empty street answers. Wolves pad the perimeter of memory and decline to enter because the table inside is full and well set, and it is rude to interrupt supper. A king dreams of a flight over the neck and wakes to the smell of porridge, and the certainty that today will be paperwork, and that paperwork will save more lives than any brilliant idea his ancestors bled for. A queen looks up at a new snowfall and recognizes it as her mother's handwriting, and then goes to the gate to greet traders who have come before their own maps said they would. Somewhere west, the ship finds a harbor that is not on any chart and may never be again, and Arya learns the most dangerous fact of all, that strange is not always threatening, and that you are strange to someone who will make room for you anyway. Somewhere north, a boy with a scar down his cheek teaches a girl with a scar across her heart how to tell when snow is lying, and they invent a holiday to celebrate it. Somewhere south, a knight removes his gauntlet before petting a dog, and thereby saves himself from losing a finger, and later writes a book about how to befriend teeth. Somewhere east, a scholar writes a dull treatise that prevents a war because the men who would have started it fell asleep reading it and woke with their angers soothed by the ridiculous mercy of rest. The future will still contain storms. The sea will break boats in half that were not properly loved. A horn will be found by someone who cannot resist and blown, and the world will shake its head, and another quilt will be needed. A dragon will rise because a child looked at an egg with such kindness the shell forgot how to say no. A council will err and admit it, and err again, and admit it better. Heroes will be born accidentally and villains on purpose, and sometimes they will trade hats and forget to trade them back. But the ground is learning again how to hold us without flinching, and we are learning to be held without mistaking it for weakness. Tonight the realm tucks itself in. The bells do not shout, they purr. The ravens on their perches practice silence and achieve it. The wine remembers to be food before it tries to be poetry. The kitchens send the last bowls out and let the last spoons lie where they fall. Windows approve of curtains. Doors decide not to slam. In the castles and the cottages, in the fat houses and the thin ones, in ships and tents and caves and towers, breath finds its cadence. A long, old rhythm the world taught us before we pretended we were separate from it. If you listen from your pillow, you will hear it. 1,000 small, unanimous agreements to try again, to lift together, to keep a fire, to share a story that makes room for the listener. Sleep. Let the map close its eyes. Let the wheel unpin its axle and rest. Morning will be waiting at the top of the stairs like a kindly dog, tail thumping once, twice, as if to say, "I knew you'd come back."